Chapter 291. Get lost if you can't bake one. It seemed like this year would be the one where things finally went my way. Yeah, I deserved it after working myself to the bone all this time. If any justice was left in this world, then even an outsider like me should get a blessing at some point. I felt happy. It was as if all the luck that had been piling up just exploded at once, sending wave after wave of unexpected fortune my way. If no one were around, I'd probably be doing flips in every direction while shouting with joy. Actually, not just in 4 directions, I'd shout to the skies in all 8 if I could. And that was why even Lather looked extra charming today. Our dear Manpower no. 3. Just looking at him made me smile warmly. Up until now, I've lumped him in with Rudy's as one of my 2 biggest headaches, but who knew he was capable of something this considerate? Of course, I should have expected this. He was a mage, a symbol of intellect. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to think when he suddenly showed up in the empty club room. I wondered if he was here to ask for some unreasonable favor or maybe to confess to some trouble he'd caused. After all, there didn't seem to be any reason for Lather to come see me first. I'll handle the mages for you. There's no need to trouble the busy advisor with that, is there? The moment he said that, my concern flipped into sheer delight. The prince of a magic kingdom was offering to take control of the mages. He had pinpointed the exact thing that was bothering me and offered to take care of it. And if you have some free time, there's a favor I'd like to ask. Don't worry, if it's something I can't help with, I'll ask the Mage Duchess instead. Now, of course, a royal wouldn't offer help without a reason. He must want something from me in return, and thankfully, what Lather wanted was something I could give. At a time like this, it was pretty obvious what a mage was after. So, I answered even before he finished speaking. I'll give you what you want if you help me out properly. Thank you, advisor. With that, we sealed the deal, and Lather gave me a respectful nod. Grateful. I should be the one thanking him. I was worried about how I'd survive this year, back when I was still in the capital, but the important manpower I needed started lining up at my door as soon as I arrived at the academy. And it wasn't just any manpower, these were highly capable ones at that. Lather, in particular, was an unexpected slave, no, an unexpected blessing. Unlike Ainter, who was bound by royal duty, or Eric, who helped out because of family ties, Lather lent me a hand entirely of his own will. Sure, it was a calculated decision, but who cared? He'd work even harder if there was something in it for him. Top tier. I closed my eyes quietly as I watched Lather leave the club room. Top tier. I couldn't think of anything else. Even though I was the Mage Duchess's soon-to-be husband, I couldn't get too close to the students as the inspector. That distance made it hard to manage them effectively. But with Lather's cooperation, I'd be able to overcome that problem. And with the authority of royalty behind him, it'd be even easier. Of course, knowing the insane passion and unpredictability of mages, even a royal might not be able to control them completely. But it was enough. Lather would weed out the troublemakers first, and with only a few left, I could handle the rest. Thank you. I pictured Lather's face again, the true symbol of reason in this era. I felt really thankful. I should make sure he gets one-on-one training with the Mage Duchess for at least an hour every day. He'd be the top mage in Yuban by the time he graduated from this academy. Contrary to my concerns, before the semester started, the academy was peaceful. I wasn't sure if the principal's speech awakened the students' consciences or if they just had good manners and common sense, but either way, everything was calm. With Sir VR managing the foreign students and Lather keeping the mages in check, how could there be any chaos? Ainter and Eric were ready to step in case of an emergency, too. It was a lineup that made my heart swell with pride. This must be how it feels like when you finally assemble the 5 Tiger Generals in a strategy game. If it weren't for Sir VR, I'd have needed 2 bodies to get everything done. With that in mind, I invited him to the club room to express my gratitude. I met with the other 3 during club hours, but I hadn't had the chance to take care of Sir VR in the same way. As it happened, the Mage Duchess was away for class, so the timing was perfect to invite someone. You're too kind. The academy would have taken excellent care of its students even without me. Haha, that's a reassuring thing to hear as a citizen of the Empire. The principal will be pleased. I smiled slightly as I poured tea for Sir VR, who responded with his usual calm demeanor. To be honest, I felt a bit guilty about how we'd decided to assign him the task of managing the foreign students without consulting him. Thankfully, it didn't seem like he held any resentment for being left out of that decision. Sir VR must have recognized the need for cooperation and division of roles to survive the chaos of this year's admissions. Honestly, we'd have been stuck without him overseeing the foreign students. It wouldn't have worked for me or the principal to step in directly since we were from the Empire ourselves. But it's true that your help has made things much easier for me. You've been so cooperative with the other countries' affairs that I can't thank you enough. I handed Sir VR a box that I had placed to my left. After all, a visible token of appreciation always speaks louder than mere words. This is a small gesture. For a knight, there's nothing more valuable than a healthy body. Sir VR had been working tirelessly with me last year, and I knew he'd continue to do so for the next 2 years. He had become something of a comrade, and it would have been a lie if I didn't feel a sense of solidarity and sympathy toward him. That was why I prepared a gift that he wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. This is a potion made by the Mage Duchess. It'll heal most wounds quickly, and it'll improve your overall health with regular use. Sir VR's eyes widened at that. Even though he wasn't particularly involved in magic, there was no way he wouldn't recognize the Mage Duchess's reputation. For a knight who relied on physical strength, high-quality potions were invaluable. And they'd be second to none if they were made by the Mage Duchess. If it's for someone who has helped baby, then I'll have to make sure it's a good one. The Mage Duchess had gone to special lengths to make this potion. Granted, it wasn't like the 40-year longevity potion I'd been consuming myself. There was no such thing as a life-extending potion, after all. I've prepared one for Dame Perosa as well, so please accept it. Thank you. I didn't expect such a precious gift. Sir VR hesitated briefly, perhaps worried that accepting too quickly might make him look greedy. But when I mentioned that I'd even prepared some for his precious daughter, he reached out immediately. After all, for a father, their child's health came before any sense of pride. I'm almost embarrassed by how shabby my gift is. He spoke with a slight awkwardness, his gaze shifting down to the well-wrapped box to my right. It seemed that I wasn't the only one feeling a sense of solidarity as Sir VR had prepared a gift for me as well. I was genuinely touched when he handed it to me upon arriving at the club room. It made me feel like my time at the academy hadn't been a waste after all. It's a gift for you and your partners. It's from a fairly well-known jeweler in Armine, so I hope it suits your taste. I was speechless when I found out he had prepared 6 sets. I hadn't expected that from such a straightforward knight. Also, it was always more moving to receive an unexpected gift from someone you wouldn't expect it from. Embarrassed? Don't be. We've given each other things we couldn't have otherwise gotten, so there's nothing modest about it. I had received the rare jewelry of Armine, and Sir VR had received the Mage Duchess's special potions. It was simply a warm exchange of gifts that neither of us could have easily obtained on our own. What was there to feel embarrassed or excessive about? Your words put me at ease. I smiled back at Sir VR as he gave a gentle smile. The world would be a much better place if only everyone in this world had half the integrity he had. I feel like I'm on the verge of hating my own kind. These mad dogs are so blind to everything around them. But I stopped myself just before that point because I understood all too well how one became such a mad dog. I might have been one of those mad dogs myself if I hadn't been part of the pastry club or if I hadn't made a deal with the advisor. Of course it wasn't going to be easy. I let out a small sigh, rubbing my forehead. I knew from the moment I tried to strike a deal with the advisor that it would be difficult, but I hadn't expected it to be this frustrating and annoying. Unfortunately, the authority of royalty wasn't enough to completely rein in these fanatical mages. After all, they hadn't come from all over the continent just because of the title of nobility, they were drawn here by the reputation of the Mage Duchess. They were too wild and unruly to be controlled by mere authority alone. I had to subtly bribe them and apply a little pressure here and there just to see any results. And even then, it wasn't a perfect solution. What a persistent bunch. Despite my best efforts, some mages refused to give in. There were already people openly signing up for the pastry club, and others were planning to submit their applications the moment the club registration period started. Lather hung. While I was sitting there, lost in thought, I heard Tannian's voice. Tannian. I wanted to wave but I had no energy left, so I just gave him a slight nod. It might have come off as rude, but instead of being offended, Tannian seemed more focused on how exhausted I was. Is something wrong? You look drained. Think you could use a bit of holy spell on me? Gladly. Tannian chuckled softly and placed his hand on my head, reciting a brief prayer. To my surprise, I felt a wave of energy returning to my body, and my mind cleared a little. I hadn't expected him to actually do it. Is this about the club? He asked as if he already knew the answer, and I nodded quietly. Everyone knew by now that I had become the gatekeeper of the pastry club. You're working hard. Honestly, I feel bad that you're the only one getting dragged into this. I volunteered, so it can't be helped. Yes, I brought this on myself. I wouldn't have been able to use it as a bargaining chip if it weren't a difficult job. If it were easy, the advisor would have handled it without a second thought. Besides, it wasn't like I was the only one suffering. Some of the mages shifted their attention to the other club members as I tightened my grip on them, looking for loopholes. Rather than waste time on an impossible path, they turned to whatever opportunity seemed slightly more feasible. That in itself was a very mage-like move. And what about you? Are you holding up? After all, Tanian was one of those members they'd likely be targeting. He was likely being pestered just as much as I was. Actually, that's what I came to talk about. Tanian's smile grew wider as he spoke. One of the new students from the Holy Kingdom is planning to start another pastry club. Question mark. Why don't we direct those eager to join our club to this new one instead? A new pastry club. The clarity I'd regained quickly clouded again. What was he talking about? Tanian, unfazed by my reaction, continued with an even bigger smile. It's strange for people who don't know anything about baking to want to join a pastry club, isn't it? So, this new club is more like a training ground for them to practice before officially joining ours. But, we didn't know anything about baking when we joined, either. Aren't duplicate clubs forbidden? I asked the most basic question that came to mind. We already had a pastry club, so how could another one be formed? Oh, officially, it's a debate club that compares the Old and New Testaments and discusses the historical contexts of each era. A debate club? Yes, they'll just be making some simple desserts during their discussions. All I could do was nod slowly in response. If you can't stop them, then you can just push them elsewhere. I never would have imagined such a method. Chapter 292. Get Lost If You Can't Bake 2 Club Registration Period. As the name suggests, this was the time when freshmen chose the club they'd be involved with for the next 3 years and applied to join. Last year's registration period was marked by Louise's relentless struggle to find an advisor for the pastry club. I couldn't forget it, either. It was the same time I had to process applications from 2 princes and a future saint. I prepared for this year's registration period with the chaos of last year fresh in my mind. The foreign students who enrolled to build connections with the royals were left to Serviar and the Mage Duchess, while Lather took care of the flood of mages. But, as we all knew, there were always those students with unstoppable energy and eccentricity who found a way to slip through the cracks no matter how much control we exercised. Or so I thought. Why isn't anyone coming? No one. It was already the 3rd day of the registration period, and yet not a single student had submitted an application. Well, except for Sarah, who had already confirmed her spot even before the semester started. In short, no one new had applied at all. This didn't make sense. There was always at least one oddball in every batch of 5 students, so how could there be no crazy ones this time? The world wasn't supposed to be this simple and beautiful. But despite how strange it seemed, the results were undeniable. What is going on? I was confused. Did another pastry club appear without my knowledge? Oh, I directed anyone interested in joining the pastry club to the debate club. It's an opportunity for them to discuss topics while learning baking. So there really was a new club. I was brooding over this when Lather came in, but Tanian spoke up instead before I could ask him. His words were so unexpected that I could only stare at him, dumbfounded. I thought it might be a headache for you, so I handled it myself. I meant to tell you, but it slipped my mind. Tanian laughed awkwardly at my gaze, but his laugh only left me feeling even more dazed. The debate club, with its full name being, A Comparative Study of the Old and New Testaments and Contemporary Society, was a deeply religious club. There was absolutely no reason why students seeking royal connections or obsessed with magic would want to join. But Tanian had successfully steered students wanting to join the pastry club into this debate group. His reasoning: it's strange for students who can't bake to join a pastry club. Is this a promotion system? The thought came to me instinctively. Overnight, the debate club had become the 2nd league, while the pastry club had risen to the 1st league, an elite space where no one could enter without first proving themselves in the 2nd. In fact, it seemed that no one would be able to join the pastry club until I finished my term here. Wow, it was amazing. I had been so focused on blocking the freshmen from joining, but Tanian had taken it a step further. He realized it was impossible to stop everyone completely, so he focused on protecting the pastry club's exclusivity. Was this the mark of a future saint? Did people have to possess this level of mental agility to become a symbol of the continent's dominant religion? I don't bet on the odds. I just pay money to enjoy the fleeting hope of making a fortune at once and the excitement during the game. My heart swelled with admiration. Was this the same Tanian who used to talk about the thrill of gambling? If so, then why was he so carefree the rest of the time? No, I get it now. He really knew how to get things done when it mattered, which was why he could afford to play hard too. Now that I think about it, he played a key role in our victory during the Twilight Cult Purge. Sure, he was a little frustrating when he was infatuated with Louise, but there was never an issue with his intelligence or character. Did I overstep? Tanian asked carefully, noticing my long silence as I struggled to process the culture shock and my shattered preconceptions. No, not at all. You did great, I hurriedly reassured him because there was nothing wrong with his actions, quite the opposite, in fact. If all meddling were like this, I'd welcome it anytime. Honestly, I was touched. I was already thrilled when Lather volunteered to be the third member of my manpower, but to learn that Tanian had silently taken up the fourth spot on his own initiative. That was a pleasant surprise. You really reap what you sow. Last year, I ran myself ragged looking after these kids. Thinking about how all that hardship and suffering was finally paying off now brought tears to my eyes. My precious troublemakers, at least they knew how to show gratitude. From now on, I should call them my little pups instead. It won't last long, though. Rudis's voice broke the emotional moment, but I couldn't argue with him. He wasn't wrong, after all. It's just a temporary fix. Tanian's brilliant move had created a temporary holding pen, but the reason it worked was because there was hope that those stuck in the second league, the debate club, could one day make it to the first league, the pastry club. However, once they realized that their efforts wouldn't bring them any closer to what they wanted, they'd revert to their wild ways again. Still, a temporary solution was better than nothing. At least we've bought ourselves some time, and in that time, I could work on coming up with a permanent solution. Aren't there a few there from Armine? Maybe I should show my face now and then. Wait, what? Would you really? I feel bad for asking, but I'd be grateful. They came all the way to the Empire just to meet me, so I should at least show my face. Rudy's laughed heartily as always, but for some reason, he seemed to glow with an almost divine aura today. That's quite thoughtful of you. Yes, it's a leader's duty to care for their loyal followers, especially those who've traveled far to serve. Haha, you flatter me. Even the Mage Duchess, who had been quietly watching Louise bake cookies, seemed impressed by Rudis's unexpected offer. Well then, I suppose I can't just stand by. It was just one sentence, but we all understood its meaning. Just as Rudy's would check in on the students seeking royal connections through the debate club, the Mage Duchess was announcing that she, too, would make occasional appearances for the students who wanted to learn from her. It'll be good for the kids. The Mage Duchess smiled warmly at me, and I almost felt like crying. Me of last year, can you see this? The me who was crawling through the academy, barely getting by, was now being surrounded by what felt like 2 of the 5 Tiger generals. Yes, this was how a proper deployment should go. This was what real work looked like. Thank you. The students will be thrilled. I expressed my gratitude sincerely. The mages would be more than satisfied if the Mage Duchess showed up even once a week or every other week at the debate club. In fact, they'd probably start taking the promotion system seriously and work hard to make it to the first league. Not that anyone would actually make it to the first league, of course. And thanks to you as well. The presence of royalty will give the foreign students a sense of security. It's no big deal. I of all people would know how tough it is to live abroad. I thanked Rudy's, the one who had set everything in motion, and he responded with a perfectly normal answer. At this point, I was starting to wonder if the Rudys of last year and this year were 2 completely different people. It was like in those sports games where a player's stats changed from one season to the next. Come to think of it, it was 78-season Rudys who crushed the Fifth Empire, wasn't it? I guess he really was a different person now. In the end, the only person who submitted an application during the club registration period was Sarah. Thanks to the unified efforts of the pastry club members, we managed to protect our beloved club. The pastry club has 1 new member, confirmed. Even the vice principal was pleased with this victory. He had probably been worried that strange new members would join the pastry club and cause chaos in the academy by mixing with the current members. I could only imagine how much stress he had been under given how his complexion had paled over the past few days. However, his face lit up after seeing the list of members I submitted. There was just one new member, and she was a perfectly normal young noblewoman who was a close acquaintance of both me and Eric. For the vice principal, who had been expecting the worst, this result must have felt like a miracle. A club entirely made up of second years, huh? It could be disbanded once the current members graduate. The vice principal, who had been reviewing the list of club members with a relaxed expression, spoke in a somewhat relieved tone. It was true, if the pastry club consisted only of second-year students, its future was uncertain. To put it bluntly, it had become a stagnant group with no new members. Well, technically, we didn't just stop new recruits from joining, we actively blocked them. Anyway, as the vice principal hinted, if this trend continued, the pastry club would eventually head towards disbandment. I suspect the vice principal wouldn't mind that at all. After all, the club had been the source of much of his stress. How happy would he be if that nightmare could quietly disappear on its own? Louise seemed a bit disappointed, though. She's considering accepting new members next year, but unfortunately for him, the chances of the pastry club disbanding quietly were slim. Louise, the club's founder, wanted to keep it going. Is that so? That's good to hear. It would be a shame for a club full of students' memories to disappear. At my words, the vice principal's attitude shifted immediately. The truth was, he probably wouldn't care much about what happened to the pastry club after its current members graduated. Sure, the club might still stir up some unpleasant memories for him, but it would just be another club among many others once the royals and nobles were gone. Of course, unless another batch of royals or nobles happened to enroll after the current members graduated, which was highly unlikely. And even then, the odds of them joining the pastry club were even slimmer. Yes, the members are quite attached to the club. They'll look back on their school days fondly even after graduation, so it's important for the club to remain. Haha, you're absolutely right. The vice principal's expression changed at my straightforward yet obvious comment about the attachment to the club and the nostalgia of school days. Imagine that a high-ranking individual who had fond memories of their time at the academy discovered that the club they were part of was still standing strong. Wouldn't they feel compelled to donate generously while hoping that their juniors would thrive in the same environment? It would be a situation where the royals they disliked while in school returned after graduation only to donate money. The academy would be very pleased with that outcome, wouldn't they? Money itself isn't evil, it was just people that were the problem. Several days had passed since I joined the pastry club, all thanks to Carl Opa's thoughtfulness. It would be a lie to say I wasn't scared of this unfamiliar environment, but with Eric by my side and the other members being so kind, it wasn't too hard to adjust. Even Louise, the club president, was incredibly friendly. However, there was still one thing I couldn't quite wrap my head around. A pastry club. No matter how I looked at it, this didn't feel like a pastry club. I watched, somewhat bewildered, as His Highness Rudy's and His Highness Lather played chess absent-mindedly. They continued their game, completely ignoring Louise as she worked on her dough. Yet, no one seemed to question this. In fact, everyone acted as though this was completely normal, which only left me more confused. Here, I'll switch this one to a bishop. A fourth bishop? Yup. Pretty clever, huh? I thought I heard His Highness Lather muttered something that sounded like a curse under his breath, but I must have misheard. Looks like Lather is going to lose again. The voice filled with boredom made me turn my head slightly. Seeing even Eric's unbothered expression as he watched the scene made me realize something. This was normal here, I guess I have to adjust as well. Chapter 293. This is the pastry club. 1. I settled onto the folding bed Eric had given me as a gift and looked around the clubroom. With 7 members, 1 advisor, and 1 honorary member now regularly hanging out, the place felt more crowded compared to last year. Turning my gaze to the right, I saw Louise checking the oven as she baked cookies. Next to her was the Mage Duchess, who had recently taken an interest in baking, while Sarah was assisting with carrying the ingredients. It's refreshing to see that these members were still untouched by the madness of the others. They're getting along well. It was especially comforting that Louise and Sarah seemed to be on good terms. From Sarah's perspective, aside from the Mage Duchess, Louise was the only other female member, and not just any member, she was the club president. It would be awkward if they didn't get along. Besides, Louise would become Sarah's sister-in-law once they graduate from the academy. There was no harm in them getting friendly now, right? Yep, this is definitely the pastry club. It actually felt like a proper pastry club with this trio of pink, white, and gold-haired ladies gathered around the baking table. Sure, Louise was the only one with real baking skills, but just having the others around to watch was something, at least. And then, there's them. Shifting my gaze to the left, I saw 5 guys who embodied chaos itself. They'd long given up even pretending to be interested. It was hard to imagine that these were the same guys who had eagerly volunteered to join the pastry club at some point. You're always pulling out the strangest tactics. Ha, thanks for the compliment. Ader had just fallen victim to the 4-bishop strategy in a chess match against Lather, who just laughed it off. For Lather, it was high praise. A chess match was unfolding right here in the pastry club room even as Louise baked in real time on one side of the room. You'd think someone would object to this insanity, but no, the male members watched the game with eager eyes, showing no signs of stopping the madness. Let me play next. Oh, beating the future saint with a bishop. That would be something special. And they weren't just observing anymore, they were actively participating. And seriously, what was up with the early gloating? Shouldn't they wait until after winning to start bragging? This is supposed to be the pastry club. I closed my eyes, unable to watch this spectacle any longer. I'd witnessed similar nonsense last year, but back then, they had the excuse of all being collectively rejected by Louise. I could understand a bit of floundering after being turned down by the girl they were crazy about. It was why I turned a blind eye to the pastry club's evolution into a chess, poker, and foot volleyball club. But this year was different. They had the whole winter vacation to get over it, and a new school year had started. Surely it was time to stop wandering and get back on track. Though honestly, turning the pastry club into a multi-purpose entertainment club could technically be considered a fresh start. They're all crazy. That was my mistake. They had shown occasional competence and brainpower that I'd almost forgotten that these guys were lunatics at heart. Eat first before you play. The cookies are done. Louise's voice, announcing the completion of the cookies, delayed Tanyan's inevitable loss in chess. Besides, I couldn't picture Rudy's losing. We could play while eating. You'll just end up spilling everything. Her firm declaration to focus solely on eating made Rudy's click his tongue in disappointment. Even I felt a sigh coming on at the absurdity of this conversation. So it didn't matter whether they played chess or not as long as they ate. They've compromised. It wasn't only the male members embracing the madness, Louise, the club leader, had surrendered as well. It didn't seem to matter to her anymore whether they played chess in the clubroom or went outside for a game of foot volleyball. She seemed satisfied as long as they ate the pastries or bread she made and gathered to chat. Of course, the true purpose of an academy club was to foster camaraderie, so it wasn't entirely off track. Still, shouldn't they at least try to uphold the club's founding purpose? I'm sorry, I couldn't help but feel a deep, unexplainable guilt as I looked at Sarah, who was smiling softly while nibbling on a cookie. With the club leader having resigned herself to this state of things, it wasn't surprising that new members, the Mage Duchess and Sarah, had done the same. The Mage Duchess seemed to find it fascinating, chalking it up to the free-spirited nature of today's youth. Meanwhile, Sarah had completely accepted the madness, assuming it was the norm. It was awful. Sarah, who was engaging in social activities for the first time in her life, was being exposed to such abnormality. The head maid would probably break down in tears if she found out. And there's nothing I can do about it. The worst part was that I couldn't even stop this strange situation. They were behaving less like a pastry club and more like a multi-purpose entertainment club, but to be honest, it wasn't really causing me any harm. It was just disheartening to see the club not living up to its name. Still, they consistently showed up, making it easier for me to keep an eye on them. They enjoyed their little games quietly and caused no disturbances. From an advisor's perspective, wasn't this the best-case scenario? If I tried to intervene and they said, then we'll go hang out elsewhere, I'd probably have to beg them not to leave. As long as they're happy. I forced myself to see the bright side. The club leader wasn't objecting, and wasn't it enough if all the members were happy? As an advisor, putting the happiness and safety of the members first was my job. So, shouldn't I be glad to see them enjoying themselves? Yes, I should just think of it that way. Fortunately, someone outside the club had a more objective view of the situation. You might need to change the club name soon. I think so, too. Margetta said with an awkward smile after hearing my grumbles. If only 1 out of 7 members was actually doing any baking, then it wasn't really a pastry club anymore, but more like a club with 0.03% baking essence. I felt a pang of cognitive dissonance. Our only new members seemed to have the enthusiasm but no baking skills, while the older members had the skills but none of the passion. The balance was completely out of whack. Who the hell set things up like this? At least they seem to care about the club itself, Margetta said, trying to find a silver lining, and I nodded in agreement. As I had stressed countless times, the pastry club was more about its actual function than its outward appearance. It didn't matter if the members loved baking if we couldn't keep people like Rudy's or Lather around. But it was enough if we could keep everyone together, even if the club became a pastry club in name only. I hope it stays this way. Still, I couldn't help feeling a bit worried. These guys had already thrown away the club's outward function and were doing whatever they wanted. It wasn't hard to imagine that one day they might disregard the entire concept of a club altogether. So, please let things stay like this until graduation. I don't care anymore if it's a pastry club, a foot volleyball club, or even if they turned the clubroom into a casino as long as they stuck together. But Carl, I didn't want to bring this up right now. Margetta spoke up carefully while I was mentally preparing to calm down Louise, who would undoubtedly be upset. I felt a sense of dread. What could she possibly want to say now? You remember that the registration period for the club fair is coming up soon, right? Oh, you had completely forgotten. Suddenly, a memory buried in the back of my mind resurfaced. Right, the first major event in the Academy's annual schedule was the club fair. Last year, it had caused quite a stir, with both the first and fourth managers attending due to the third honor. We need to submit our booth plans for each club. So, what's the pastry club planning to do this year? Quote. I couldn't bring myself to answer. There was no way I could confidently shout, we'll be running a baking booth again this year. Judging by the current state of things, someone was bound to suggest running a completely different booth. And as always, my ominous predictions never failed. Isn't it a bit boring to run the same booth 2 years in a row? As expected, Rudy's, with his devilish grin, was the first to open his mouth and kick things off. I almost slapped my forehead. Of course we were supposed to continue with the same booth theme, it was a club booth, after all. What other theme would we run if it wasn't connected to the club? Other clubs would probably cry if they heard that. I didn't even have to look far. Louise's face already showed clear shock. This must be the difference between a madman and a normal person. Booths are supposed to stick with the same theme. Oh, really? Yes, you idiot. The words rose to my throat, but I held them back. The 78th season Rudy's wasn't the same as last year's. His merits still far outweighed his faults, for now. So, I had to tolerate him. Why am I even having this conversation? A wave of futility washed over me. Was it really necessary to debate the club fair booth theme? Shouldn't we naturally stick with last year's baking concept? Do clubs usually run booths unrelated to their theme these days? No, even the Mage Duchess, who was watching this ridiculous scene, quietly asked Louise if something had changed over the last century. Of course, Louise responded in a voice filled with defeat, as if her heart was breaking. Hearing that, even the Mage Duchess's face showed signs of confusion. Damn it, I suppressed the sigh that threatened to escape and glanced at Eric, who stood there staring blankly. I needed to rally as many sane people as possible before the lunatics took over completely. Thankfully, Eric caught my look and hurriedly spoke up. The glare I shot him, the one that screamed, "I'm going to lose it if you don't stop this madness," must have done the trick. Wouldn't it make sense to run a baking booth? We turned down new members on the grounds that they couldn't bake, so it would be weird if we gave up baking ourselves. That's true. If we lose that justification, the control we've barely established will crumble. Lather added, backing Eric's argument. I was genuinely moved. My two valuable allies, manpower numbers 2 and 3, were following my lead. Was this what it felt like to be a boss managing his subordinates? What would I have done without them? Without them, I would have had to convince all 5 of these members by myself. That was a terrifying thought. Thinking back, it was amazing that I survived last year without losing my mind. Chapter 294. This is the Pastry Club 2. After the perfectly logical arguments from manpower numbers 2 and 3, it was decided that the Pastry Club's booth for the club fair would feature a pastry theme. In other words, it was as obvious as a steakhouse serving steak or a diner serving rice, there wasn't really anything to debate. I still couldn't believe it. It was one thing to discuss the booth concept and the details, but we must be the first club in history to argue so much over the concept itself. We've made a rather embarrassing mark in the history of this Academy's clubs. Now that I think about it, we could make chocolate pastries shaped like chess pieces. That sounds fun. It would showcase the club's versatility. I almost lost it again after listening to Rudy's and Tanyan's conversation. How did that show versatility? What did chess have to do with our pastry club? Chess or whatever, it was just some members indulging their personal whims. Our club was all about pastries. They shouldn't drag private hobbies into public events. Well, I did say some members, but to be honest, it was most of them. But still, it was personal indulgence. Chess piece-shaped treats. Unfortunately, the fact that it still fell under the category of pastries was enough to pique Louise's interest. She was the kind of person who added herbs to her dough just because she wanted to create something unusual, so making pastries in the shape of everyday objects was the perfect challenge for our veteran leader. That's a great idea. Food should be a feast for the eyes and the mouth. And just like that, I lost another ally to this madness. Lather joined Rudy's, either thinking it was a good idea or feeling he'd already fulfilled his duty by sticking with the pastry theme. What a critical betrayal at the most decisive moment. I guess royalty had a knack for political maneuvering. Well, we'll figure it out somehow. With the leader's enthusiasm and about half the members on board, we started hearing more suggestions: cookies shaped like playing cards, and candy shaped like foot volleyballs. I just tried not to react. Did it matter what shape they were as long as they were still pastries? Sure, like Lather said, food that looked good also tasted good. Whether chess pieces or cards were shapes that naturally boosted one's appetite was another question, but they'd definitely attract some attention. Should we add a gambling element too? A random thought crossed my mind. We could have customers play chess against Rudy's, win, and they get their treat for free, lose, and they'd pay double. That would be pretty fun. If we were going to go wild, then we might as well go all out. It was better to be boldly outrageous than to half-heartedly play it safe. That way, people would be drawn in by our confidence. After we officially submitted the theme for our booth to the student council, the atmosphere in the club shifted dramatically. What had been a club carried solely by the leader was now a group effort with everyone pitching in. If we make them with puff pastry, they could be as thick as a card, don't you think? With 3 or 4 layers, that should be about right. It was just a shame that this newfound passion seemed misguided. It didn't look like we were making pastries anymore and more like we were crafting merchandise. Or was it just me? Maybe it was because our merch materials just happened to be flour. Louise, is this enough whipped cream? Yes, that's perfect. The silver lining was that the Mage Duchess, who'd shown an interest in baking, seemed to be learning. Though her skills were still at the beginner level, her willingness to learn was top-notch. All right, I'll make another one, so hang tight. Meanwhile, the veteran members were busy discussing ridiculous topics like the perfect card thickness or the ideal shape for a foot volleyball candy. It made the Mage Duchess's dedication stand out even more, and she wasn't even an official member yet. Was this really how it was supposed to be? Where else would you find a guest working harder than the actual members? Ah, Master, that area is dur. Louise, who was watching the Mage Duchess fondly, tried to stop her from walking toward the spilled flour, but she never finished her sentence. She closed her mouth as the Mage Duchess's hair swept across the floor, leaving not even a speck of flour or dust behind. A robot vacuum. I had to stifle the laugh that almost escaped. I already knew that the Mage Duchess's hair had a vacuum-like effect, but I'd never seen it clean so thoroughly before. At least I was just a normal person, so all I had to do was hold back my laughter. If a group of mages had seen that, they probably would have wept. Nobody had the skill to infuse their body with magic 24/7, and yet the result of that power here was a vacuum cleaner. It wouldn't be surprising if they cried about the sheer waste of talent. It's spotless. Louise, who had been silent for a moment, muttered in a gloomy voice. She was a mage too, so she must have realized just how absurd that little performance was. Watching it happen in real time must have been quite a mental shock. But we should look on the bright side. Unlike other mages, Louise was the Mage Duchess's only disciple. One day, she would reach that level too. Achoo! As Louise gazed somewhat bitterly at the Mage Duchess's back, I heard a faint sneeze. It was so faint that you wouldn't even notice it unless you were really paying attention. Sarah. Yet, Eric reacted to that barely audible sneeze. Just a minute ago, he was talking about how we should decorate the puff pastries with chocolate to make card designs. How did he even hear that? Sarah, the culprit, blinked, clearly startled by his ghost-like reaction, her hands covering her mouth. She was probably embarrassed. It was only natural to want to show your crush your best side, and getting caught sneezing in the corner didn't exactly fall under that. However, there wasn't much she could do about it in this pastry club room, where flour was flying everywhere. Did you sneeze? You're not feeling sick, are you? If the person you liked suddenly rushed over because of a simple sneeze, wouldn't you try to hide it? I know I would. I'm fine. It was just a sneeze. You said you were fine last time too, and then you collapsed that night. Sarah blushed slightly, flustered by the questioning, but Eric continued, his face stern. Now I see why he was so worried. She had a history. If she had collapsed after saying she was fine before, then it was understandable he'd be worried. Wasn't that a long time ago already? Despite her embarrassment, Sarah seemed somewhat pleased, as if touched that he remembered such a detail about her. Anyway, while Sarah was flustered, Eric was busy checking her complexion. It's not cold in here. Of course it wasn't. It was spring right now, and considering how this room was full of high-ranking members, the heating and cooling systems were flawless. Could it be a pollen allergy? It was the flour. It was probably not an allergy, though. Muttering so seriously that it almost made everyone uncomfortable, Eric finally grabbed Sarah's hand. I'm taking her to the infirmary. All right, I had a lot of things I wanted to say, but I just let it go. It was clear he was overreacting, but right now, he wouldn't hear any of it. Rudis's eyes turned wistful as Eric led Sarah out of the clubroom. I can't blame him for feeling a little sad. For once, I could understand Rudis's feelings. The five of them had all been living the solo life ever since they were turned down by Louise. But now, it seemed like one of their fellow solo comrades, Eric, was on the verge of leaving them for coupledom. They weren't officially dating, of course, but everyone in the club knew that Sarah had feelings for Eric. She was constantly holding his hand and rarely strayed from his side. You'd have to be a complete fool not to notice. I figured it out as soon as I returned from vacation, and the other members knew as soon as school started. The sad part was that Eric was the only one who hadn't realized it. This guy, it was like he stepped straight out of a romance novel. The moment he got caught in a love line, he reverted to his old clueless self. Just when he was starting to act like a normal human being. So, it was no surprise that Rudis felt a bit betrayed. While watching Eric prepare to leave the single life behind. Who's going to serve for us in foot volleyball now? Ellipsis. Damn it. So much for betrayal. He was just worried about losing a foot volleyball teammate. Our club was losing its identity, and my younger brother's intelligence had reverted to prehistoric levels. Meanwhile, one of our members didn't care about romance as long as their foot volleyball team stayed intact. This was too much. The insanity this year was on a different level from last year. Maybe the universe got bored of giving us the same trials and decided to mix it up for variety. If that was the case, then NN must be a real piece of work. At their age, it's natural for them to be unpredictable. Even noble blood can't hide their youth. You're telling me this is normal? It's no surprise that you wouldn't know, given that you never had a school life. I bit back the urge to curse at the minister. His casual insults were enough to make me want to explode, but I held it in. If I gave in to my instincts, this would devolve into a full-on verbal brawl. Still, it was frustrating. It wasn't like my lack of schooling had done him any favors. What a life. It was sad, really. While the subordinates I sent on remote missions diligently filed regular reports and worked hard, my direct superior just teased me instead of offering any support. Then again, that would be terrifying in its own way if the minister ever did try to offer comfort. Imagine how bad things would have to get for him to feel the need to console me. Well, you'll get some well-deserved time off when your mission ends. You have to put in the effort to earn your rewards. Yeah, I know, but that didn't mean he had to hit me with the cold, hard truth, though. By the way, after laughing at my unimpressed response for a while, the minister cleared his throat and continued. Do you remember how the academy is open to outsiders during the club fair? Yes, I remember. Last year, several nobles came by to greet me during the club fair. How could I forget? This year, quite a few are coming from other countries as well. Question mark. In particular, the folks at Ernesto Academy are really fired up. They're calling it an international educational experience and are all in a frenzy over it. Pardon, what was that supposed to mean? People from other countries. Ernesto Academy. Oh, even the principal of Ernesto Academy submitted an application. For the sake of his dignity, we classified it as a top-secret document. Keep it to yourself. I suddenly recalled something the Foreign Affairs Minister had said before the start of the semester. Among the moths drawn to the flame that was the Mage Duchess, the principal of Ernesto Academy was one of them. Could they be coming here because they couldn't get in any other way? This is crazy. I was left speechless by the sheer madness of it all. Was there no such thing as a normal mage? Chapter 295. This is the Pastry Club 3. Since most of the empire's nobility attended the academy and were active in its clubs, the club fair had become more than just an academy event, it was essentially a grand affair of the empire. It was a social gathering where graduated nobles returned, connecting with the current students under the pretext of being senior club members. That was what the club fair had come to mean. And now, the fair has evolved from a domestic event into an international one. Yes, that's correct. I received the news yesterday as well. I see. I went straight to the principal the day after the minister told me that foreign guests would be attending. His calm reply confirmed it. So, even the principal heard about it only yesterday. It was no longer just a possibility but a certainty if the news had reached the principal, the highest authority at the academy. The minister's words to me might have been mere rumors, but that meant that the Department of Education had officially said, "We're expecting guests," if even the principal had heard about it. Ridiculous. What could possibly be so interesting about a student-run fair that people would cross borders for it? Did they all have too much time on their hands? Some of us didn't even have the luxury of taking breaks even if we wanted to. Though they'd probably have come even without the fair. Of course, it was obvious, to me, to the principal, and even to Sir VR who was passing by, that their main goal was visiting the academy itself and not the fair. They had been waiting for any excuse to get in, and now that the fair allowed outsiders to enter, I wouldn't be surprised if they practically somersaulted through the gates. Moreover, while the minister mentioned that those from Ernesto Academy were particularly enthusiastic, it wasn't just them. Mages from all over the continent would be rushing in. High-ranking mages could easily use teleportation, so crossing borders was no problem for them. I'm concerned we might be overwhelmed by too many guests. This could place undue stress on you, principal. I hesitantly asked after imagining a flood of lifelong learners who had failed to get into the academy swarming in. After all, this commotion, which was caused by the Mage Duchess's visit, was obviously because of me. If I had any sense of guilt, I'd be apologizing to the principal. After all, he took the hit for something that wasn't even his fault. It's quite all right. After all, the purpose of the fair is for everyone to enjoy themselves, isn't it? Besides, the more guests, the merrier. However, the principal responded with a calm smile. How strange. His expression and tone didn't suggest sarcasm or resignation, either. Is he really okay with this? But why? From his perspective, a routine event had suddenly escalated to something that demanded special attention. If it were me, I'd want to strangle whoever disrupted my schedule. If I wanted to be optimistic, I could say that it was the principal's experience and patience shining through. However, the burden of administrative work didn't get lighter with age. In fact, having more to do as you get older was just more depressing. At some point, wouldn't he wonder whether dying from overwork or retirement would be the better option? Sensing my confusion, the principal's smile deepened as he continued. Ernesto Academy has expressed a desire to model their educational system after ours. They wish to attend not as guests, but as students, and hope to learn from us. Oh, really? The moment he said that, I understood why the principal looked so calm, and, on closer inspection, perhaps even quietly pleased. He won. It seemed that the principal had come out victorious in the long-standing battle of pride between the two academies. The Imperial Academy was the continent's premier institution, known for its all-encompassing curriculum. Meanwhile, Ernesto Academy was the magical powerhouse specializing in magic. By tradition, both academies were headed by great mages, resulting in a subtle rivalry between them. When considering the overall educational system, the Imperial Academy clearly came out on top. However, since the principals were mages before they were educators, the rivalry played out solely in the magical field. Given that the United Kingdom of Yuban's magical prowess was nothing to scoff at, the rivalry was as intense as a fierce sports match. However, that balance was shattered when the Mage Duchess made the Imperial Academy her base. It was like having Einstein, who had lived for 120 years, pick a side. It was game over. Congratulations. It seems that even Yuban cannot surpass the Empire. I'm glad the principal's hard work has paid off. Haha, it wasn't just my effort. The Academy's long-standing prestige made this possible. Either way, the principal couldn't stop smiling after such a huge victory in this academic rivalry. It also made sense. To end a long-standing rivalry with a clear victory in favor of his school would surely make him one of the most celebrated principals in its history. Honestly, it's to be expected. How could any other kingdom compare when the pinnacle of magic resides here in the Empire? I just nodded in response to his proud words. This was the first time I'd seen the principal show such strong emotions, but this was a pretty restrained display considering that most mages weren't exactly known for their emotional stability. And speaking of which, that reminds me of the time I visited Yuban in my younger days. Well, I should just keep believing that this was still restrained. I never imagined that one sneeze would cause this much trouble. Hey, Eric, do you think I could head back in now? No, his firm answer made me close my mouth, which I'd barely opened. I'd been outside for what felt like a long time, but it seemed that it still wasn't enough by Eric's standards. This really isn't necessary. It was embarrassing. Eric had been acting like me entering the clubroom again would be some kind of death sentence ever since that sneeze landed me in the infirmary. Specifically speaking, he'd pull me outside whenever the club was about to start baking. The reason? He didn't want me to stay inside in case I sneezed again and caused more trouble. It's only because of the flower. I'll get used to it eventually, but it'll just make it harder for me to adjust if you keep doing this. Of course, I initially protested. Sure, I'd joined the club partly to spend more time with Eric, but I was still a pastry club member. What kind of club member couldn't even participate in the activity they signed up for and would be pulled out every time it started? Even with my limited experience, I knew that was weird. What if it's not just the flower? What if it wasn't just an itchy nose that made you sneeze, but your body's way of rejecting it? However, Eric wouldn't budge. It was an absurd argument. If I were allergic to flour, then I would have realized it long ago, especially with how many cookies and loaves of bread I had eaten by now. Flour before baking and flour after baking could be different. Let's just stay outside together until we know for sure. Still, hearing the concern in his voice made it hard to keep refusing. Alright, it wasn't like he was doing this for any other reason than to look out for me. If it was for my sake, then I should just go along with it. Besides, maybe Eric was right, and I really did have some kind of problem with flour. I'd already gotten a thorough checkup in the infirmary, so it was just a matter of waiting a few days to be sure. And it's just the two of us. Honestly, it was a bit embarrassing but also kind of wonderful. I enjoyed just being in the same space as Eric, but going on walks alone together like this was even better. It was our own private time, uninterrupted by anyone else. Thankfully, Carl Opa, Louise, and the other club members understood, though I wasn't sure whether it was because they genuinely thought I was someone who could end up seriously ill from flour or they just got tired of Eric's overreaction. Do you want to sit down for a bit? Oh, sure, I guess Eric interpreted my earlier question about going back inside as a sign of fatigue because he was now guiding me toward a nearby bench. Of course, I wasn't really tired. We were just strolling around the pathway near the building. If that was enough to exhaust me, I wouldn't have made it into the academy in the first place. But if Eric misunderstood, then I was more than willing to pretend to be tired. Just leaning on his shoulder should be fine, right? Would it be okay if I leaned on his shoulder for a bit? I doubt he'd push me away if I leaned against him. I'd honestly love to rest my head on his lap, but that would be a bit too much since we were outside and not in a carriage. Alright, I should settle for his shoulder for now. After all, sharing a moment in the spring breeze like this was romantic in its own way. Were you nearby? A voice interrupted my daydreams just as I was lost in my happy thoughts. Turning my gaze toward the sound, I saw Prince Rudy's bouncing a ball as he approached. And, as if that wasn't enough, he was accompanied by Prince Ainter, Prince Lather, and Lord Tannion, all of them. This was odd. Weren't they all supposed to be busy debating the shape of cookies and candies? They had been so absorbed in it to the point of being unapproachable that I thought they'd be at it for several more days. What's going on? Why are you all out here? Even Eric seemed puzzled by their sudden appearance. It wasn't surprising given that he had been part of the debate as well. He had likely felt the intensity of it even more than I did, so he must be even more confused. I'm tired of using my head. We have to move our bodies as much as our brain to stay healthy, you know. It was a bit of a strange logic. But if royalty said that, then I guess it must be true. The club members, having been absorbed in their largely unproductive debate, all decided to take a break and headed outside together. Took them long enough. I wasn't particularly surprised. After all, these were the same people who turned a pastry club into a foot volleyball club. Spring in this world wasn't plagued by dust or yellow sand, so it was the perfect season to play outside. My only concern was that Sarah happened to be near the field where they liked to play. Was it a good idea to expose her to their impromptu foot volleyball match when she was already picking up their bad habits? After staring out the window for a while, I reassured myself and turned away. Not only was Sarah there, but Eric was with her, too. I trusted him to handle the situation before any strange misunderstandings arose. Am I doing this right? Yes. Wow, you picked it up so fast. Foo-foo, I suppose it's because I have such a good teacher. Left behind in the clubroom were Louise and the Mage Duchess, the two of them chatting away. Listening to their conversation, as always, left me with mixed feelings. The entire club might have run off, but here was the Mage Duchess, who wasn't even an official member, lingering around like a permanent fixture in the clubroom. In fact, she'd been more diligent than most of the actual members since the year started. Despite being the hero who ended the great rivalry, she didn't seem to care much for the attention. Maybe I should just hand over the advisor position. Honestly, the Mage Duchess had probably baked more bread than I had at this point. She was already more suited to the role of the pastry club's advisor than I was. They say that picking up a hobby late in life could be intense, but it turned out that she wasn't just the Mage Duchess, she was also the Duchess of Baking. Chapter 296. This is the Pastry Club 4. It was a strange turn of events. A duke who had reached the pinnacle of magic was now striving to master the art of pastry making. Could it be that the Mage Duchess, who had left an indelible mark on continental history, had wandered down an odd path, all because of me? Isn't it a good thing? She's lived her whole life without a hobby, but now she finally found something she enjoys even if it's a little late. Marghetta's words made a lot of sense. Generally, a duke's private life wasn't a topic even the Ministry of Intelligence could freely discuss. But nobilities, being part of society, socialize. Thus, their hobbies and tastes naturally circulated within certain social circles. It wasn't like they only met with the blind, deaf, or mute, so it was inevitable that these details leaked out. Yet, despite over a century of ruling, very little was known about the Mage Duchess. As a child, she had avoided the public eye due to her elven heritage, and she dedicated herself entirely to magic and kept very few personal connections when she became a duke. Even if she did get close to someone, they would inevitably age and pass away before too long. She must have been so lonely all this time. Her closest vassals have passed, and the other mages of her generation were gone, too. That must be why she chose to focus on magic. Her sympathetic tone tugged at my heartstrings. She was right. The Mage Duchess, with her extremely limited relationships and the natural distance created by her mixed race, had spent her entire life isolated in her tower, pouring herself into magic. That choice had earned her the title of the Mage Duchess, but it had also left her without even a decent hobby. Her life, despite the honor and prestige, must have been quite boring. I never thought of it that way. I felt a bit ashamed for mocking her newfound passion for baking. Shouldn't I be celebrating the fact that my fiancé, who once knew nothing beyond magic, had found a new hobby to enjoy? Yet, I thought of it as something strange instead of congratulating her. I thought I'd shaken off my prejudices about her, especially since I'd started calling her by name and even spoken formally with her. Yet, deep down, I was still full of assumptions. I even unconsciously decided that it was absurd for the noble, refined Mage Duchess to dabble in something as trivial as pastry making. Foo-foo, don't dwell on it too much. I doubt you, Annie would want you to feel guilty over something like this. Marghetta consoled me with a soft voice after a pause. I almost laughed after hearing her stutter as she said, Annie, so shyly, but I held it in, not wanting to ruin the progress she'd made. If I laughed now, she might slip back to using the more formal, Mage Duchess. Do you think so? Yes. So cheer her on and make sure you try whatever she makes. Telling her it's delicious would be even better. Of course, I'll do that. Who in their right mind would insult the food someone worked hard on? Besides, my tastes are pretty simple, so I'll eat it as long as she doesn't put in any strange ingredients. Wait, strange ingredients? It suddenly hit me that her baking teacher was Louise, the very same Louise who had a talent for including odd ingredients and who made creations during the 77th season that even her love-struck suitors couldn't stomach. Somehow, only my dulled taste buds could endure those strange flavors. Sure, Louise had eventually learned to bake properly, so the Mage Duchess should be fine. However, there was always the chance she'd lose control and teach her one of her special recipes. It'll be fine, right? Yeah, it should be fine. If the worst case scenario happened and the food turned out weird, I'd just hold my breath and chew through it. After all, what someone just starting a hobby needed was encouragement and not criticism. Knock knock. Margetta, may I come in? While I was steeling myself for whatever might come, I heard Amelia's voice outside the door. Yes, come in. The door creaked open carefully with Margetta's permission, revealing Amelia with a plate full of pastries in hand. Judging by the way they were piled on, she must have scrambled to prepare them as soon as I arrived. Honestly, I didn't need the snacks. I already had my fill of treats back in the clubroom. Still, it wouldn't be polite to decline a guest's offering. Besides, Amelia's spirit was as fragile as crystal under the pressure of nobility. One wrong word and she might shatter, so I had to tread carefully. Hello, executive manager. Yes, it's been a while. At least she was doing better than last year. Back then, she would practically tremble as if she were standing before the Mage Duchess himself whenever she saw me. So, you're the new treasurer. That's impressive, especially since you just joined the student council in your second year. Thank you. It's all thanks to you, executive manager. Amelia bowed deeply at a 90-degree angle at my casual praise. But honestly, my praise wasn't just for show. It really was impressive. Student council officers usually started from their first year, but Amelia had joined in her second year and still secured a key position. She was a true rolling stone, who had displaced others to earn her place. Her talent must be exceptional. Perhaps it was her commoner status that had fueled her drive to succeed at the academy. And the fact that no one was whispering about her accomplishments showed that she had proven herself beyond doubt. I'm sure you'll do great as treasurer no matter where you go. Yes, I'll work hard. Her reply was filled with a robust enthusiasm, this time thanks to my subtle hint about a recommendation letter. That was also the reason she wasn't as nervous this year. Watching last year's student council officers walk off with my recommendations and securing bright futures clearly sparked Amelia's ambition. As a commoner student, she craved success more than anyone else. To her, I must look like a walking treasure chest. Of course, Amelia was like a duck carrying a leek as far as I was concerned, a treasure waiting to be put to good use. She was practically begging for my endorsement, so of course I'd give it to her. Both sisters are quite the talents. Her sister, Olivia, was already the vice representative of the disciplinary committee. She'd undoubtedly become the representative next year, and I'd write her a recommendation to the military. It was thrilling just thinking about it. This academy was truly a gold mine. The debate club was a temporary haven for students who had failed to join the pastry club en masse. The official excuse was that it was a place for those who weren't proficient at baking to practice, but any student with half a brain could see that this was just a holding cell. It was only because Tannian, the next saint, had led the charge that everyone kept quiet about it. And it was true that the original pastry club members had actual baking skills, which was why they followed along. Luckily for me, I hadn't enrolled to study under the Mage Duchess but to serve Prince Lather, so I wasn't too disappointed. Her Grace will visit the debate club. Not every day, but she'll probably come once a week. Lather also told me that, so there was no need for me to feel let down. That valuable bit of information quickly swept away any disappointment I had. Still, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little hurt when I failed to join the pastry club. Besides, I had come all this way to serve him. We'd known each other since childhood, so I couldn't help but feel a bit hurt when I was lumped together with other students. But his care for me was genuine. Otherwise, he wouldn't have shared such crucial information about the Mage Duchess. Is this the debate club? The Mage Duchess had asked the day she first descended upon us. I was able to maintain my composure thanks to that inside information, unlike the other members who were practically losing their minds with excitement. Maintaining my dignity had an unexpected outcome. The Mage Duchess noticed me. A mage must remain logical and composed at all times, no matter the situation. It seems you've already mastered that. Hearing those words felt like I had been handed the world. To receive such praise from the Mage Duchess, someone who had reached the pinnacle of magic, there couldn't be a greater compliment in existence. What's your name? I am Rachel Sorta of the United Kingdom of Yuban. Ah, so you're the one Prince Lather spoke of. I almost cried when I realized that he had mentioned my name to the Mage Duchess. It was proof that he had been thinking of me. From that day on, the Mage Duchess would visit the club once a week. Even though we only received her teachings for half of our club time, everyone was beyond grateful. After all, mages wouldn't even get a minute of her instruction outside the academy, so we had nothing to complain about. Just sitting through classes must get boring. Help yourselves to some treats, the Mage Duchess said one day while placing a basket on the desk. Inside were perfectly bite-sized cookies. Not only had the Mage Duchess personally prepared them, but they were a rare gift from her, a true honor for any mage. Still, there was a part of me that wished we could spend this time learning instead of eating. I made them myself. I hope they suit your tastes. The moment she said she made them and not bought them, it became clear, we had to eat them. Our attitudes shifted in an instant, and we flocked to the desk, each grabbing a single cookie. Taking only one each was likely the last bit of rationality we could muster. So the Mage Duchess bakes too. It was surprising. I would have thought she wouldn't spare a glance at anything that wasn't related to magic, or that she'd use magic to do it if she did bake. Yet, here she was, baking cookies by hand. Actually, there had been some minor grumbling among the club members since the creation of the debate club. While mages as symbols of intellect didn't mind debating, some questioned the necessity of learning pastry making on top of that. But now, with the Mage Duchess herself engaging in baking, those complaints were sure to disappear. As I took a small bite of the cookie in appreciation, I felt something strange. Is my mana circulation increasing? It wasn't my imagination. The flow of mana within my body had noticeably sped up. It felt like a blockage had been cleared, allowing my mana to move more smoothly. Why was this happening? Everything had been normal just moments ago. Oh, it hit me as soon as I swallowed the cookie. This was it. The cookie was the cause. There was no other variable, and the change had occurred right after I swallowed it. Glancing around, I saw that others had noticed too. Some were now quickly eating their cookies, while others stared at the Mage Duchess in stunned silence. That a simple cookie could affect mana was a concept beyond our comprehension. It was an achievement of a realm far above us. Is this what it takes to qualify as a pastry club member? I couldn't think clearly as the Mage Duchess smiled gently and my mana flowed intensely within me. Everyone seemed to be enjoying the cookies, which was a relief. That meant they tasted fine. I can give some to baby now. A soft smile formed on my lips. I could finally give baby a cookie I had made myself. How could I not be happy about that? Although I hadn't yet mastered bread, macarons, or cakes, which were still too advanced for me, it was important not to get ahead of myself. If I tried too much too soon, I wouldn't even lay a proper foundation. For now, I had to be content with cookies. Will he like it? Just imagining baby eating the cookie with joy and gently patting my head in praise made my ears twitch with excitement. Chapter 297. How far did you research? A major incident erupted just before the club fair. Even I, the principal, and Sir VR, who had become somewhat desensitized to typical crises, unanimously agreed that it was a bombshell. It's true, my mana circulation has sped up. I silently nodded, acknowledging the dazed tone of the principal's voice. This proved that the Mage Duchess's cookies could enhance anyone's magical abilities regardless of their skill level. Unbelievable, who would have thought a mere cookie could have this kind of effect? The principal, still in shock, lifted the cookie with trembling hands, clearly unable to gather his thoughts. I just watched silently given the gravity of the situation. This was shocking even for me, a non-mage, so I could only imagine how the principal, who was an experienced mage himself, was processing it. No one could have predicted this, especially not at such a critical moment. Who would have guessed that the Mage Duchess, who had been quietly focused on baking, would drop such a surprise, and right before the club fair, no less. It wasn't intentional, though. Not that anyone could blame the Mage Duchess, this was as much a surprise to her as it was to everyone else. The Mage Duchess had immediately started baking after finishing her weekly lecture at the debate club yesterday. She must have been tired from the long day, but she threw herself into her work with a bright face. I didn't interfere. After all, she seemed to enjoy it. The cookies, which she made with a wide smile and Louise's encouragement, were eventually placed in front of me. Baby, would you mind tasting this and giving me your thoughts? Of course I'd be happy to. I nodded quickly. The Mage Duchess had baked countless cookies since the start of the semester, but she always insisted on handling the failed ones herself. This was the first time she was offering me one of her creations. So I gladly took a bite, fully prepared to say that it was delicious no matter what. What is this? But something strange happened the moment I tasted it. The mana in my body started circulating faster, much faster. This shouldn't be possible. A minor stimulant or potion could have an effect on someone who was just starting to learn magic. But for someone like me who had been through all sorts of magical enhancements and potions, only the strongest ones would have any effect. And yet, my mana flow had increased with just one bite of a cookie. Doubled, even. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. However, I became sure of it after finishing the entire cookie and then the entire plate. This was no fluke. Somehow, the Mage Duchess had imbued these cookies with the potency of high-grade potions. So, how is it? Do you like the taste? I almost laughed when the Mage Duchess asked me that while looking at me with a hint of nervousness. It didn't seem like she was hoping for a reaction to some potion surprise effect, she just wanted to know how it tasted. I answered with a quick, "It's delicious," to reassure her, but my mind was racing. If the Mage Duchess had taken these cookies to the debate club without even knowing about this mana-boosting effect, then this absurd rumor would spread like wildfire. And of course, those rumors came true. Word of the Mage Duchess's homemade mana-boosting cookies spread rapidly, which was why I was now sitting here on a weekend, brainstorming with the principal. The timing couldn't be worse. It's just before the club fair. The principal finally spoke after a long silence, sighing deeply. I completely agree. It was an entirely reasonable statement, and I couldn't help but agree. Just the fact that these cookies were handmade by the Mage Duchess made them incredibly symbolic. Every mage at the academy, and even outsiders, would be clamoring to get their hands on one. I could already picture people buying one for themselves, one to brag to friends who couldn't come to the academy, and another to preserve forever using a preservation spell. But now, the cookies had the power of a potion on top of their symbolism. And not just any potion, but one so potent that even a seasoned warrior like me, who had been through plenty of doping, and the academy's principal, a grandmaster-level mage, were affected. There was no way people could resist. The higher the level of a mage, the stronger their thirst for mana. Besides, mages were the type to bet everything they had, even for the slightest advantage. This will cause an uproar for sure. The Mage Duchess had really done it this time. Not only did she turn the academy upside down, but probably the entire continent as well. So, what do you plan to do? I asked the principal, who was sighing deeply while still nibbling on more cookies. How would he handle a rumor so enticing that it could throw the mages into a frenzy? It's too late to contain it. It's been a full day, so the rumors already spread as far as it could. Trying to silence the students now would only confirm the story for any visitors. Once again, the principal's response was spot on. Indeed, there was no way to keep a lid on this. The mages, known for their relentless curiosity and action, would have spread the word as soon as the club session ended, just like human loudspeakers. Those loudspeakers wouldn't just echo within the academy, the news would travel across the empire and beyond, reaching the whole continent. The mages' network wasn't something you could ignore. Anyone could tell there was a cover-up if all those academy loudspeakers suddenly went quiet. Even those who were uncertain about the rumors of these doping cookies would rush to the academy, fully convinced. It was a nightmare. Letting the gossip spread was a problem, but trying to stop it would do more harm than good and would only spark debates about student oppression. Should we just let it be? It was a major incident, but we seemed to have no choice but to sit back and do nothing. It was frustrating. So, I have a favor to ask of the executive manager. From me. His request caught me by surprise. Was there really something I could do in this situation? Even with my title, my authority wouldn't mean much if foreigners started flooding in. Since things have turned out this way, we're going to make it a full-blown promotional event. Ellipsis question mark. Did I hear that right? He wanted to advertise it even more in a situation where we should be trying to keep as many people away as possible. Has he lost his mind? I couldn't help but wonder. The principal, who had once dreamed of hosting a modest, cozy club fair, where the most he expected were visits from a few noble alumni, seemed to have finally snapped. His modest little event had now evolved into an international fair, so maybe it made sense. The principal continued, undeterred despite my disbelief. Everyone will want a taste of the Mage Duchess's cookies, but demand will far outstrip supply. Yes, that's likely. It was so obvious that it didn't even need to be said. There was only one Mage Duchess, and yet hundreds, if not thousands, of people would come from all over the continent. No matter how skilled she was, there was no way she could meet that kind of insane demand. So, let's make it a limited edition. Perhaps auctioning them off wouldn't be a bad idea. Pardon, what was he saying now? Experience and quick thinking honed by years in leadership were things no youngster could match. It was clear that the principal didn't earn his title through luck alone. If we can't meet the demand, then it's better to make the cookies a limited edition. People will complain if we sell them normally and they sell out, but they'll just blame their own wallets if they're auctioned off. Ah, right, but we can't just auction off something the Mage Duchess made without her consent. That's where you come in, executive manager. I need you to persuade her. Of course, that much I can do. A chill ran down my spine. It would look like we failed to prepare if we sold them normally and they sold out, but that would be the buyer's problem if they went up for auction and people couldn't afford them. It was the kind of ruthless capitalist logic you'd expect from a merchant leader. But it wasn't wrong. The Mage Duchess's special mana-enhancing cookies weren't something people could just buy easily. If they wanted one, then they'd better be prepared to shell out a fortune, or maybe two. I don't mind. I don't even have enough to give to you, so selling fewer cookies isn't a problem. Fortunately, the Mage Duchess didn't have some altruistic dream of wanting more people to experience her cookies, so persuading her was easy. The downside was that I'd probably end up eating the cookies that were supposed to be sold at the booth. Thank you, Beatrix. Feeling grateful nonetheless, I reached out and gently rubbed the Mage Duchess's ear. We were alone since the other members were still in class, so I could get away with it. Rubbing someone's ear as a form of thanks might seem strange, but surprisingly, the Mage Duchess preferred it over a head pat. It must be some kind of elf thing. Sure enough, the Mage Duchess melted into a relaxed puddle as soon as I touched her ear. She seemed to like it so much that it made me happy, too. Ernesto Academy was more than just an educational institution, it was practically the symbol of the United Kingdom of Yuban. The great mage who played a crucial role in uniting the 5 rival kingdoms of the Yuban region into one and dedicated his life to advancing magic after the kingdoms became the United Kingdom of Yuban became revered as Mentor Ernesto. Bearing his name, Ernesto Academy wasn't just a school, it was the very embodiment of Yuban's identity and a living piece of its history. If the Empire of Kefalofen is the one with heaven's mandate, then Yuban holds the hegemony of magic. This was a quote left by the third principal of Ernesto Academy, a source of pride. While they acknowledge the Empire as the strongest, they firmly believed that even the Empire couldn't surpass Yuban when it came to magic. Every mage from Yuban held onto that lesson deep in their heart. We hold the hegemony of magic. In all things magical, we do not bow to the Empire. We are the greatest magical nation on the continent. That sense of pride had never faded. As a result, Ernesto Academy has been locked in a long-standing rivalry with the Imperial Academy. Is everything ready? Yes, we're ready to depart at any time. It was only a shame that this rivalry ended in defeat during my time. But what could be done? The Mage Duchess had aligned herself with the Imperial Academy, and there was no way to challenge her unless Mentor Ernesto himself were to rise from the dead. The loss stung, but for a mage, refusing to accept a disadvantage and clinging to pride was a mistake worse than death. You had to acknowledge your shortcomings and gather what resources you could, that was the rational way. Let's go. The students are eagerly waiting. Besides, losing to the Mage Duchess was an honorable defeat. Future generations who mourned this loss would surely understand once they learned who the opponent was and respond that there was nothing we could have done. It's just a temporary retreat for future progress. And if I could meet the Mage Duchess in person, learn from her, and secure one of those elusive mana-enhancing cookies that rumors were spreading about, then this defeat would be well worth it. I made sure to bring plenty of funds just in case, enough to buy a decent territory or even a castle. It should be enough. Chapter 298. How far did you research? 2. Last year's club fair brought in wave after wave of visitors. People came for all sorts of reasons. To meet royals, connect with the next saint, or to catch a glimpse of the elusive prosecutor's office's executive manager, a rare sight in high society. For many, it was simply a chance to buy desserts crafted by high-ranking nobles and boast, I ate a treat made by royalty. Honestly, the reasons to attend far outweighed the reasons not to. And this year, the reasons to attend only multiplied. Ader, who until last year was a royal in name only, had reclaimed his authority. On top of that, the legendary and revered Mage Duchess had made an appearance, and there was even talk that eating a cookie created by her could give the effect of a potion regardless of your magical level. There's indeed a lot, and here was the result. Despite placing our pastry club's booth in the most remote and quiet spot, guests rushed straight here the moment the club fair opened, ignoring all the other booths. The only silver lining was that half of the academy visitors were nobles. Because of that, some might visit other booths first, feeling embarrassed about skipping over their juniors. Meanwhile, others would maintain their noble composure, walking leisurely toward us. The problem was with the other half. They were mad mages who couldn't care less about juniors or dignity. It's been a long time, Tower Master. How have you been? As an advisor, I had the chance to observe the guests closely. The elderly man at the front respectfully bowed to the Mage Duchess. But who was he? For someone to be first in line to greet her, he must be someone notable, and yet I couldn't recall him. I felt a faint recognition, but I was unsure of his name or position. Did I see or hear about him somewhere? Ah, Manfred. Yes, I've been well. Oh, only after hearing his name did it click. He was none other than the former Vice Master of the Magic Tower, a historic figure. Wow, this guy was still alive. I thought he'd passed away after retiring, but I guess he had just been hiding out in some mountain retreat. I regret not sending any word all this time, but I'm so glad to see you again like this. At your age, it's better not to hear any news at all. Whenever I hear from someone your age, it's usually bad news. The Mage Duchess casually blurted out something only she could say. Telling a Gandalf-like old man, "I'm glad you're not dead," was that really okay? Haha, that's true enough. Judging by his reaction, it seemed fine. I suppose anyone who had served as the Magic Tower's Vice Master and known the Mage Duchess for so long would be accustomed to this sort of dark humor, especially given their differences in lifespan. Maybe he was just happy to see his old boss again after such a long time. Here, take this. It's been a while, so I should give you a gift. Oh no, this is far too generous for a guest who came empty-handed. The Mage Duchess handed him a small box with a slight smile. It was modestly wrapped in about the size of something you could find in a local shop. In short, it was nothing too fancy. There's no need to bother with the auction. Just relax and enjoy yourself. The former Vice Master's eyes widened at the mention of the auction. There was only one thing the Mage Duchess could be giving away that would warrant such a comment. To Tower Master, this is. Shish. With a simple gesture to be quiet, the former Vice Master immediately closed his mouth. Though his lips were sealed, his face still showed a mix of confusion and awe. The fact that the Mage Duchess's cookies had a mana-boosting effect and that they were being sold not at the booth but through an auction was being heavily promoted right at the Academy's main entrance. That was probably why the former Vice Master of the Magic Tower was so shaken. He thought he'd have to throw bags of gold just to get one of those cookies, and now it had just been handed to him as a gift. Oh, it's not like I made them myself. There's no harm in giving a few to an old friend I haven't seen in a while. The former Vice Master, touched by the care shown for an old acquaintance, looked at the Mage Duchess with moist eyes. Such a considerate yet nonchalant boss, no wonder the mages held her in such high regard. An old friend. From my perspective, however, it was hard to suppress a laugh. The Mage Duchess's words and actions were like a grandmother giving snacks to her grandson, but the reality was that they looked more like a grandfather and his granddaughter. Still, I held back. It might hurt her feelings if I laughed now. Even Eric, with his regressed intellect, would know not to do that. It seemed that other mages, either not noticing the former Vice Master receiving the mana-doping cookie or simply lacking the courage to make a scene in front of the Mage Duchess, greeted her politely and quietly left. Since they were here as guests, some even bought a few cookies before leaving. It seemed that they still had a shred of conscience. Maybe I should have told them they didn't need to buy anything. I slightly regretted it. After all, the mages probably wouldn't care unless they were the Mage Duchess's special cookies. They might not have bought any if I had told them not to, and we'd have more stock left. I saw Louise as I glanced around, busy baking in real time, along with the members who had rejoined her out of a sudden sense of urgency. Meanwhile, Ainter was greeting the incoming wave of noble guests. There's a lot of them. There were just as many nobles now as there had been mages earlier. In fact, there were probably more nobles, given that mages had to travel from all corners of the continent, while nobles were mostly local to the empire. There were even a few foreign nobles mixed in. Honestly, I should have reserved the cookies for the nobles. It was hard enough to keep up with their demand as it was. It's an honor to see your highness again. Haha, the pleasure is mine, Count. I heard there was a small disturbance in your territory. Did everything get resolved? Yes, thanks to your highness's concern, it has been taken care of. I sighed softly as I watched Ainter, who was engaged in polite conversation. He maintained his smile, almost as if it had been permanently frozen in place. I felt a little sorry for him, but also proud. Thank you. Thanks to Ainter, who had debuted as the third prince at this year's New Year's ball, the noble guests spent most of their time with him before coming to me. Compared to last year's club fair where I had to deal with them firsthand, this was much easier. Of course, the guests would eventually make their way over to me after the thrilling one-on-one meetings with the third prince. But by then, they had already introduced themselves and covered their main concerns with Ainter, making my role much easier. Not having to rack my brain wondering, who was this again? While greeting nobles was a major relief. I was genuinely grateful to him for that. My manpower number one is really something else. I couldn't help but feel warm at the thought. Ainter, a valuable talent personally dispatched by the Crown Prince, was indeed a blessing. I appreciated manpower numbers 2 and 3 who assisted with academy matters, but handling nobles was far more of a hassle. So, I kept my eyes on Ainter. Thanks to him tanking the crowd, I could relax a bit. If anything went wrong, I'd jump in to help. That was just the right thing to do. I didn't expect that I'd have to jump in so soon, though. I greet your highness the third prince. A woman with silver hair tied in a ponytail and striking red eyes bowed her head slightly toward Ainter. She appeared at least 20 years younger than the nobles who had greeted him earlier. Ainter, who had been speaking non-stop until that moment, suddenly found himself at a loss for words. For Ainter, who essentially made his social debut during the New Year's ball, most of the nobles he had interacted with were older, titled nobles. Naturally, he wouldn't have encountered a young noblewoman like this before. He was probably trying to figure out which high-ranking family she belonged to. But he had no idea. She wasn't some noble's daughter, she was a titled noble herself. Countess Horfeld. There were no other guests at my booth, so I slipped over to Ainter. It was usually impolite to interrupt a conversation between two people, but leaving Ainter to fumble through his memory seemed a bit cruel. I could always pretend I was just glad to see an old acquaintance. Oh, Karl Oppa, you're here as well. Countess Horfeld greeted me with a light nod as soon as she noticed me. I had worried that she might have forgotten me, but she thankfully hadn't. Countess Horfeld. Ainter's eyes widened in recognition after overhearing our conversation. Yes, this was Countess Horfeld. After her predecessor's surprise retirement last year, she inherited the title of Count and a seat in the Imperial Council at the young age of 19. Yes, Your Highness. I am Zenobia Haydn of the House of Horfeld. I had the chance to see you at the New Year's ball, but I failed to greet you properly due to my foolishness. Haha, no need to worry. Everyone knows how much the counts of the Empire work for the Imperial family and the Empire. I understand. Ainter quickly waved his hand, flustered by her formality. It made sense that Ainter had never met her before. The only Imperials a count typically interacted with would be the Emperor or the Crown Prince. There would hardly be a reason for a third prince, who was distant from the throne, to meet with a count. Still, it showed Ainter's lack of political awareness that he hadn't recognized her sooner, especially since he had just reclaimed his power. Then again, maybe it was simply safer not to pay attention to such things considering the political dangers he had faced before. That thought felt a little sad. You seem to be acquainted with the executive manager? Ainter asked, attempting to steer the conversation. Yes, the Haydn and Crossius families have long been acquainted, so I've met him a few times. Countess Horfeld replied calmly. Honestly, she was more familiar with Eric than with me, but technically she wasn't lying, and I must apologize for my earlier lack of decorum toward the executive manager. She added, turning to me with an apology. I wasn't sure what she meant at first, but I realized she was probably referring to calling me Karl Oppa instead of using my formal title. It's fine, you didn't call me by the wrong name or anything. After all, it wasn't as if she had addressed me disrespectfully. As long as it didn't reach the level of swearing like, hey, you jerk, I really didn't mind. I felt satisfied after seeing Karl smile a little. It had worked perfectly. I had presented myself not as the reckless girl I was before inheriting my title, but as a dignified count and proud member of the Imperial Council. The way I swiftly acknowledged my mistake and apologized, emphasizing our formal relationship over any personal ties, this must have made a good impression on Karl, the executive manager. This is how you score points. Since Karl was stationed at the academy and I was residing in the capital, our opportunities to meet were rare. Every word I spoke and every action I took had to be carefully considered. I need to get on my future brother-in-law's good side. After all, Karl was Eric's brother and the future head of the Crossius family. Winning his favor would make my marriage to Eric that much easier. Chapter 299. How far did you research? 3. The role of the Imperial Council was to enact laws and keep the executive branch in check, at least in theory. In reality, it was nothing more than a gathering of those who follow the Emperor's orders without question. They drafted laws that aligned with His Majesty's desires and attacked departments or officials who fell out of favor. That was the true function of the Imperial Council and its members. In the early days of the Empire, council members were mocked as the Emperor's rubber stamp or lapdogs of the imperial family. But today, those same insults were now badges of honor as council members sit at the very core of power. They were the closest advisors to the Emperor, trusted and cherished by His Majesty, and constantly by his side. For the nobles, there was no greater honor than this. The Imperial Council was the first sword the Emperor wielded and also his final shield. Thus, it was only natural that the council members would be the first to respond to any crisis in the Empire. It seems the Academy will be rather lively this year. These were the words of Count Yvelt, the eldest among the assembled council members. Although Count Vardon was officially presiding, no one objected when Count Yvelt spoke first. His seniority and experience gave him greater authority than the rotating chairman position. Haha, let's hope the students aren't too shocked. It's all a part of the learning experience. You could even call it an opportunity. No, I'm not so sure. Overwatering a plant can rot its roots. Calling this an opportunity might be stretching it. Following Count Yvelt's comment, the other council members began to voice their opinions one by one. The restoration of the third prince's powers, the Mage Duchess's continued residence at the Academy, and the presence of key figures who have been staying there since last year, these factors had attracted more attention to this year's Academy Club Fair than ever before. The importance of the visitors, both in title and position, was no small matter. Naturally, this had drawn the attention of the council. The Empire, or more specifically the Academy, was experiencing unusual events, and the council must show interest in them. That was the proper role for those who served the Emperor and the Empire. The only question was who would take responsibility for showing that interest. At least we can relax, knowing Countess Horfeld will be there. Haha, true enough. It's probably better for the younger generation to handle this. There's no need to worry this time. After all, I was the one going. Wilhelm, that old fool. He had shown no interest in political alliances. All he kept talking about was how we should meet on our own, as if love was all that mattered. Not long ago, father contacted me from our territory with some important news. My future father-in-law, Count Helgelhen, had decided to leave Eric's marriage decision up to him. So, I volunteered to go as soon as the Imperial Council turned its attention to the Academy. The more I met with Eric, the more chances I'd have to talk to him. That was the only way to make my dreams come true. Hoping for results without effort would be foolish. Setting aside my responsibilities at the capital to take on this mission was no small sacrifice, but I didn't regret it. In fact, I became excited at the thought of seeing Eric again after so long. Who's that? At least, I was excited, until I saw the blonde girl clinging to Eric's side. Honestly, it was Eric who was close to Countess Horfeld, not me. I didn't have any friends, but Eric had plenty. Maybe Eric shared that same easygoing nature as a capybara. So, I gave a polite greeting and handed Eric over to Countess Horfeld, but it seemed that might have been a mistake. I'm screwed. I realized that the moment Countess Horfeld, who had been smiling warmly at Eric, froze up upon seeing Sarah and when Sarah linked her arms with Eric. Yeah, something felt off. Why would someone as busy as Countess Horfeld, who only recently inherited her title, come all the way to the Academy? And why would she stiffen the moment she saw Sarah? The answer was obvious. That one's a capybara with a dark side. It seemed that Countess Horfeld had feelings for Eric as well. Of course, Eric had no clue. What an idiot. Zenobia Nuna. It was clear how badly this was going even from a third-party perspective, but Eric himself seemed completely oblivious to any sense of danger and was responding with his usual calmness. Well, to be fair, he did look a little surprised at Countess Horfeld's sudden appearance, so maybe he wasn't entirely calm. But he was still an idiot. It's been a while, Eric. You've grown quite a bit, haven't you? Quickly regaining her composure, Countess Horfeld greeted Eric in a much gentler tone than the one she used with me. Since Eric wasn't a civil servant yet, she could still treat him like a younger brother. Let's just ignore the fact that she clearly wanted to be more than just an older sister. Wow, I didn't expect to see you here. How have you been? You've got to be kidding me. Eric, arm in arm with Sarah, walked right up to Countess Horfeld. I almost cursed out loud at the sight. What was wrong with him? If he was going to approach her, then he should at least unlink arms with Sarah. And if he was going to keep holding her arm, then he shouldn't walk up to her at all. Why was he trying to do both at the same time? Was he trying to create some kind of disaster here? This was no different from putting two fighting roosters in the same pen. As expected, the two roosters, now within each other's striking range, began to eye each other with sharp, intense glares. I've been doing well, but, forcing a smile, Countess Horfeld trailed off as her gaze shifted back to Sarah. Given their height difference, she looked down at her almost condescendingly. Who was this child? A friend? She even called her a child. Coming from an older, taller woman, that label practically turned Sarah into a child on the spot. And to make matters worse, Sarah was already shorter than most of her peers, having struggled with her illness for some time. This is Sarah, my childhood friend that I told you about before. Ah, that one. Countess Horfeld's delayed reaction came with a thick smile. She's the daughter of the head maid, right? The young lady of the Tramara barony, I remember now. Was it just me, or did that sound like a veiled insult? Like she was really saying, what's the daughter of a servant doing with a count's child? Unfortunately, it wasn't just me who picked up on it. Sarah's eyes flickered for a moment, and then she launched a quick counterattack. Eric, is she Zenobia from the Haydn family? Yeah, that's right. So, you must be Countess Horfeld. You must be so busy, but it's so kind of you to come all the way to the academy. I instinctively took a few steps back. It might have sounded like a harmless comment, but hidden within it was the jab, are you really so free as a count that you can spend your time at the academy? And seeing how warmly you treat Eric without any formalities, you must be a very kind-hearted person. Oh, that was another one. That was a subtle etiquette critique, asking if it was proper for a titled noble to be so casual with a lower-ranked noble's child. I couldn't help but rub my neck. The back-and-forth verbal duel left me breathless as a spectator. Looking around, I noticed that even the other club members were instinctively inching away from Eric's group. It was honestly terrifying. For those of us who had only experienced soft, peaceful relationships like the race of the club members for Louise and my 6 lovers who settled everything without a hitch, this fierce verbal sparring was like witnessing the embodiment of hell. This was a moment of real madness that made our tame experiences seem fake by comparison. Louise. Meanwhile, Louise, Eric's first love and also his first heartbreak, was subtly distancing herself from the scene like a mouse avoiding a trap. She looked like a mouse terrified of getting caught in the crossfire. Of course, Sarah had no idea about the past between Louise and Eric as the entire pastry club had kept that information tightly under wraps. Still, even if she didn't know the details, guilty people often instinctively felt fear, and Louise was definitely keeping a safe distance. The sharp back-and-forth exchange between Countess Horfeld and Sarah finally ended when the Countess made her exit. Technically, she left to avoid drawing more attention from the surrounding guests. I'll see you later. I'll be staying at the academy throughout the club fair. But that was just a pause in the battle. If Countess Horfeld remained at the academy, a second and third round could break out at any moment. Should I run for it? I seriously considered it. Sure, it might seem ridiculous to run away from something like this when I wasn't even directly involved, but watching 2 acquaintances verbally fight over my clueless little brother. No one could handle that, not unless they actually enjoyed watching romantic chaos. To make matters worse, my younger brother, who was caught between them, had the emotional awareness and intelligence of a caveman. I bet he didn't even realize the 2 of them were sniping at each other. My head hurt. Last year's race for Louise already drove me crazy as a bystander, and now I might get caught in another crossfire. Maybe it was because these 2 childhood friends had been sharpening their knives for over a decade. I never thought I'll have to worry about something like this. The frustration was eating at me. Just when I thought I'd taken care of everything, from managing the various groups threatening the academy to organizing the flood of new students, now my family drama was becoming the next big problem. But what choice did I have? On the bright side, at least it was a personal rivalry instead of some event that could shake the academy or the empire. Although, calling it small might be a bit of a stretch. Oh, so these are the loaves of bread made by Lord Tannion. Yes, do you like them? Of course. Give me 5 more. As I stood there brooding over the absurdity of it all, I noticed a young priest impulsively buying Tannion's bread at the booth's corner. At least the priests, unlike the mages or the nobles, weren't causing any trouble. I didn't even need to greet them personally, which was a relief. Priests are the best. They were truly good-natured people and devoted followers of Enon. It was impossible to even compare them with other professions. Excuse me, Hung, could I trouble you for a moment? That was, until Tanian suddenly called me over. Of course he had to pull something like this just as I started thinking well of him. Brother Bedler has a question he'd like to ask you. Me, I tilted my head in surprise. It wasn't like I had any close ties with priests, maybe with civil servants or nobles, but not with the clergy. Of course, anyone could ask me a question even if we didn't know each other. However, it was usually rare for priests to approach a high-ranking official first unless they were a bishop who had to dabble in politics. What is it about? I couldn't exactly ignore a polite guest, so I nodded and walked over. Brother Bedler quickly bowed his head in greeting. His courteous demeanor ticked all the right boxes. Sure, I didn't know what his question was, but I was ready to answer if I could. How hard could it be? It turned out to be something difficult. Have you had any encounters with heretical sects? I froze, momentarily at a loss for words. Heretical sects? What in the world? I did take part in suppressing the Twilight cult. And any other sects? I had no idea. To be honest, I didn't even know what other heretical sects existed besides the Twilight cult. Brother Bedler stroked his chin thoughtfully, his eyes scanning me, especially my upper body, as if searching for something. What's going on here? Couldn't he just tell me already if he had something to say? Chapter 300. How far did you research? 4. My curiosity grew just as rapidly as Bedler's intense gaze continued. If he was going to bring up heresies out of nowhere to pique my interest, then he should take responsibility instead of clamming up like that. Wasn't it just cruel to leave me hanging? One of the two most frustrating ways to talk to someone was to start a conversation and then abruptly stop, and the second was, "Ah, I apologize." Luckily, Bedler seemed to realize his rudeness and hastily broke the silence. Fine, I'll let it slide since he spoke up before I had to push him. As I mentioned earlier, I sense the presence of heresy in you, brother. However, I can't quite pinpoint which god's influence it is. Still, my curiosity wasn't fully satisfied, so I subtly glanced at Tanian. From the way Bedler was talking, there really seemed to be some heretical aura I wasn't aware of. But how could Tanian, who I'd spent almost a year with, fail to notice an aura strong enough for a stranger to detect immediately? I might have brushed it off as a lack of experience if Tanian were a novice priest. However, Tanian was the next in line to become a saint. If anyone would have missed it, it should have been Bedler, not Tanian. I'm not skilled at detecting heresy. Sensing my gaze, Tanian quickly defended himself, saying that this wasn't his area of expertise. That sounded odd. Just last summer, I watched Tanian use his holy tracking spell to utterly dismantle the Twilight cult. It was like having a god's eye view of everything. And now he was telling me that he was weak at detecting heresy. If that was the case, then only someone like Enon would count as strong. Couldn't you just use your tracking spell to find out? Haha, the tracking spell only works on heretics who have received direct power from a god. Traces left behind are a different matter entirely. That didn't make sense. Wasn't it still heretical energy whether it was a heretic or just a trace? If I go into more detail, I'd have to delve into theology. Do you really need me to? No. Sensing an incoming overload of unnecessary information, I shook my head firmly. I didn't need to know that much. We heresy archivists are especially sensitive to heretical energies. In this field, at least, I'm more of an expert than Tanian. Bedler's additional explanation seemed reasonable, so I decided to let it go. I didn't know much about holy spells or priests in the first place, so it would be ridiculous for me to argue. If the experts say so, then I'll just trust them. There was no point in overthinking it. Besides, it made sense that different priests would specialize in different areas. Knights and mages had specialized skill trees, so it only made sense that priests would, too. Brother, if it's not too much trouble. Apparently still unable to figure out the source of the trace, Bedler tilted his head in thought before speaking cautiously. Could you remove your clothes? ? My mind went blank for a moment. Naturally, he wasn't asking me to strip for some inappropriate reason. It's just that relying solely on intuition has its limits. I think I'll need to confirm things more directly by looking at the trace. It was like asking someone to remove their mask to see their face because just hearing their voice wasn't enough. Well, that was true. Looking directly would be more reliable than relying on the aura he felt under my clothes. Of course, this is purely my personal curiosity, so please feel free to refuse. I'm actually sorry for even asking such a thing. It's fine, taking off my shirt isn't a problem. Although Bedler stepped back a little, Perhaps noticing how strange his request was, backing out was a crime since he'd piqued my curiosity this much. Now that he'd caught my interest, I was curious myself. And I realized something after he asked me to remove my clothes. I should have known earlier when Bedler was staring at my upper body. It's the scar. A scar ran from my left shoulder down to near my right hip, like a long highway. It was a parting gift from Kagan, who gave me a final strike before he died. No matter how I looked at it, it could only be that. He had muttered something about the eternal blue sky when he cut me, so it must be connected. Ah, this is it. When we moved to a more secluded spot and I showed him the scar, Bedler, who had been wearing a complicated expression, suddenly broke into a wide smile. Now that I think about it, he really was an oddball. Even the minister had grimaced when he saw this scar for the first time, calling it ghastly. Is it his thirst for knowledge? He reminded me of Gerhardt, who had dedicated his life to the study of the North's history. Bedler seemed like the kind of person whose curiosity and desire for knowledge came before anything else. Otherwise, why would he react like this? Ah, I see. It's vast yet confined, turbulent yet serene. With such a complex nature, it's no wonder it's difficult to grasp. I see. He was using some strange expressions, but I ignored them. If this was the way experts spoke, then so be it. Bedler spent a long time examining the scar before nodding, looking quite satisfied. The confusion he'd shown in the booth was gone, as if he had now identified exactly whose trace this was. Thank you for indulging my request. I gave a light nod in response to Bedler's near 90-degree bow. I only cooperated because I was curious myself, and I had my own favor to ask of this heresy expert. So, did you figure out which heresy it is? It's the eternal blue sky. It's a god worshipped by the nomads in the north, a unique deity that is both a nature god and an animal god. Since this matched my suspicions, I nodded. Of course it was related to Kagan's final strike. If it had been some ordinary curse, it wouldn't still be causing this unhealable penalty. That bastard. I had hoped it wasn't true, but it looked like he really did hit me with divine energy. So, that wasn't just an ordinary cut, it was divine punishment. No wonder it hit so hard. Anyway, I felt more at ease now that we knew the source. It wasn't some random god I'd never heard of, and asking for Bedler's help would be easier since he was familiar with this god. I have a favor to ask as well. Oh, of course, please feel free to ask. If it's within my ability, I'll gladly help. Thankfully, Bedler had no intention of shirking his duties as a priest as he responded with a bright smile. Good, since he'd said that much, I could ask without holding back. About this heretical energy, is it possible to cleanse it? I asked carefully, my heart pounding a little. If Bedler was a specialist in detecting heresy, then surely he could also cleanse it, right? The reason this scar had remained for so long was because of that cursed, eternal blue sky. It was lodged in my body and refused to leave, which was why the wound wouldn't heal. If I could evict this insane squatter, then the scar would definitely heal too. Please, I don't want to carry this thing for the rest of my life. If I had to show this scar every time I shared a bed, they'd honestly be horrified, not to mention that neither Louise nor Irina even knew I had this scar yet. Ah, the moment I saw Bedler's subtle reaction, I knew. It wasn't going to work. Damn it, that's right. If this were a wound that a priest could heal, then someone would have done it long ago. After all, there had been plenty of priests who had tried to treat me right after the war, and surely one of them would have sensed the heretical energy if it had been something they could remove. I guess I asked for too much. Forget I said anything. Still, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. After learning the source of the scar, I had hoped that maybe I could get it healed as well. I can make it fainter. What? Hope surged within me again. Did he mean he could weaken this unwanted guest in my body? Suppressing it would be impossible if it were divine punishment directly bestowed by a god, but your wound appears to be inflicted by a human. If the heretical energy was channeled through a human vessel, then it can be suppressed. My mind raced at this promising news. So, the wound wasn't entirely the fault of the eternal blue sky, but rather that bastard Kagan. I silently apologized to the eternal blue sky for wrongly blaming it with Kagan's crime. Of course, completely erasing it is impossible. But even just weakening it should restore much of your health, so you can find some comfort in that. Of course, I'd be more than grateful for that. I'm glad you think so. With a small smile, Bedler began reciting a prayer as he placed his hand on my shoulder. Arg. However, we coughed up blood at the same time. What the hell was happening now? Both Bedler and I collapsed onto the ground, writhing in pain. After having my hopes so high, the unexpected shock hit me like a sledgehammer. It felt like a titanium spear had pierced my heart. Beside me, my blood-spitting comrade Bedler was groaning in shock, struggling to lift his head. I almost called him Quack, but one look at his face kept me silent. This is strange. The god's energy, the will of this god is too strong. Bedler muttered in confusion, spitting out the blood pooling in his mouth. He didn't look like someone who had been careless. In fact, he looked like someone who had been diligently attempting a healing and was blindsided by the result. This only happens when a god is enraged, but for a wound caused by a mere human to invoke this level of interference. Still mumbling to himself, Bedler suddenly turned to me with a look of uncertainty. Brother, I need to confirm something. What is it? Have you ever killed an apostle of the eternal blue sky, desecrated a shrine, or insulted a holy relic? Just hearing those ominous words sent shivers down my spine. Who in their right mind would do something so insane? Even a god who loved humanity would turn into an angry deity after that kind of treatment. And the fact that something clicked in my mind made me shudder even more. An apostle is someone favored by a god and is acting on their behalf. You could think of them as the equivalent of a saint in the Dawn sect. Holy relics are items bestowed upon these apostles by the gods. While Bedler helpfully continued explaining the terms and I stayed quiet, something indeed came to mind. Unfortunately, the more he explained, the more my nagging suspicions turned to certainty. An apostle, the final offering to the eternal blue sky is myself. Judging by what Kagan said before, it seemed like that bastard was an apostle, after all. I was the one who landed the final blow. A shrine, team manager, there's a building that looks like a religious site. Burn it. We can't leave any rallying point for the Gar tribe. Yeah, I probably burned it down when we wiped out the remnants of the Gar tribe. I remember smashing a wolf statue at the entrance, too. A holy relic. Master, this is. Just throw it in the storeroom. There's no need to take care of it. Could it have been that greatsword and scythe Kagan always carried around? Ellipsis. I'm fucked. What should I do now? All this time, it wasn't Enon messing up my life, it was the eternal blue sky.